It's 8 years old. He's made like 6 since then.
It's the latest one I've seen.
Yeah. He's working on one now.
Yeah. You will recognize perhaps J.B. and Tierney on that soundtrack. Academy Award nominated, am I right?
No.
Oh.
I wish it was.
Sounds good though, doesn't it?
It should have been. It should have been, but no, it wasn't.
Oh, well. Wow.
But JB and I did a real co-write on that one.
Yep.
That's true.
It's true. Thank you so much, Tierney. That was really beautiful. Welcome back. It's our afternoon session. When I taught at a university, classes after lunch were always the most difficult because everyone fell asleep. That may have had more to do with my delivery than the content, but nevertheless, I hope everybody had a good lunch and you're feeling energized, well rested, and ready to hear Stephen again. I was talking to him over the lunch break and saying, what an incredible presentation that was this morning. Just astonishing, truly. So I, for one, and I'm sure all the rest of you are eagerly awaiting hearing what Stephen has to say. Take it away, Maestro.
Actually, and I'm not kidding, I think to get across what I really want to get across, the best thing to do at this point would be to turn over the mic back to Tierney and have her sing for another hour.
That's happening tonight.
Because what you're gonna hear is more sort of intellectualizing around what could be happening here at the edges of the map. We're standing at the edge of the vortex, and this valley of absolute nothingness is the vortex. As we saw at the end of the last session, the state of annihilation to self, annihilation of self, is somehow mystically paired with the opposite of eternally enduring in God, of immortality in God. And whereas in the Seven Valleys, and it's a little bit, I think, of a maybe unfortunate accident that the Seven Valleys was published and translated in the format that it was. Because if you'll notice in the present translation of the Seven Valleys, there aren't these section breaks with each valley. And that was done on purpose because those section breaks are not in the original Persian. Baha'u'llah doesn't say the valley of search and then gives a description, and the valley of love and give a description. Because in doing so, a slight, inaccuracy was introduced, especially in the last valley, because the section heading of the last valley is the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness. And that's not Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah didn't give, a section title to that. Because when you actually look at the content of the section is the pair of Fana and Baqa. The content of the section is the annihilation in God and the annihilation to self and the eternal subsistence in God. It gives the impression that, and for decades I think it gave the impression that for Baha'is the end of the spiritual journey is nothingness. Just a bit of a downer. But if anyone else had that impression, that's our idea of the furthermost point is, okay, you're total erasure. And that's just the accident of the section head being in there, which isn't part of the text. So now that the section heads have been pulled out, you can see that that the real content of that seventh valley in the Seven Valleys is that pairing. But in Gems of Divine Mysteries, it's made explicit. And so let's look at the text of Gems of Divine Mysteries to start us off down this road of trying to get a sense of what's going on with this mystical pairing of annihilation and immortality. So this is at the bottom of page 71. From this most august and exalted station, this is a station of fana, of annihilation, and from this most sublime and glorious plane, the seeker entereth the city of immortality, therein to abide forever. In this station he beholdeth himself established upon the throne of independence and the seat of exaltation. Then will he comprehend the meaning of that which hath been revealed of old concerning the day whereon God shall enrich all through his abundance. Well is it with them that have attained unto this station and drunk their fill from this snow-white chalice before this crimson pillar. Having in this journey immersed himself in the ocean of immortality, rid his heart from attachment to aught else save him, and attained unto the loftiest heights of everlasting life, the seeker will see no annihilation, either for himself or for any other soul. He will quaff from the cup of immortality, tread in its land, soar in its atmosphere, consort with them that are its embodiments, partake of the imperishable and incorruptible fruits of the tree of eternity, and be forever accounted in the lofty heights of immortality amongst the denizens of the everlasting realm. He goes on and says more, which I won't read the entirety of it again for reasons of time, but he continues saying, I shall, however, bring my theme to a close, since time is short and the inquirer impatient. And since these secrets are not to be openly divulged, save by the leave of God, the Almighty, the All-Compelling. So there's something that he's saying that he can't say about this stage. Something perhaps dangerous, and we'll get specifically to that topic of danger in a little while. And then we have this warning about those who, getting to this point, if they fall prey to pride and vainglory, they're returned. At that very moment, all comes to naught, and they return to the first step without realizing it. Indeed, they that seek and yearn after him in these journeys are known by this sign, that they humbly defer to those who have believed in God and in his verses. They're lowly before those who have drawn nigh unto him and unto the manifestations of his beauty, and that they bow in submission to them that are firmly established upon the lofty heights of the cause of God and before his majesty. For were they to reach the ultimate object of their quest for God and their attainment unto him, they would have but reached that abode which hath been raised up within their own hearts. How then could they ever hope to ascend unto such realms as have not been ordained for them or created for their station? Nay, though they journey from everlasting to everlasting, they will never attain unto him who is the midmost heart of existence and the axis of the entire creation, he on whose right hand flow the seas of grandeur, on whose left stream the rivers of might, and whose court none can ever hope to reach. How much less his very abode, for he dwelleth in the ark of fire, speedeth in the sphere of fire through the ocean of fire, and moveth within the atmosphere of fire. How can he who hath been fashioned of contrary elements ever enter or even approach this fire? Were he to do so, he would be instantly consumed. So a few things that arise for me in reading this, one of which is that the ultimate end of the quest, as far as we're concerned, is a reality that lies within our own selves. We, I suppose, shouldn't be that surprised at that because it's already in the first few hidden words in the Arabic. And several of them give this theme: turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting. And with the hands of power I made thee, with the fingers of strength I created thee, within thee I have placed the essence of my light. So already prior to this, Baha'u'llah in the hidden words gave us a bit of the key to where the end of that mystic journey lies. Something that kind of like, I mean, I hate to bring in quantum mechanics because it's abused a lot in context of people trying to talk about spiritual things, but I think one reason why people continue to do it is because there is something profound about this reality of the universe, that it exists in a state of potentiality until it's observed. And what you observe is a function of how you observe it. You know, whether you measure this particle as having this spin or that spin, or being in this position or that position, it's a function of how you set up the detector. That determines the kind of answer you can get. And that's the same thing with these spiritual questions, I think. If you set up your interior detector to detect, say, God in a certain mode, then that's how you're going to detect it. And if you set it up in some other way, you might not detect God at all. You might not see it at all. The presence and absence of things themselves become a kind of something that's relative to our own mode of exploration of that thing. Baha'u'llah doesn't stop in Gems of Divine Mysteries with this valley of immortality, but he goes one more. So it's not just that we're going a little bit beyond the seventh valley, but there's two more valleys afterwards. And this next valley, after the valley of immortality, describes briefly in the following terms. From this station the wayfarer ascendeth unto a city that hath no name or description, and whereof one heareth neither sound nor mention. Therein flow the oceans of eternity, whilst this city itself revolveth round the seat of eternity. Therein the sun of the unseen shineth resplendent above the horizon of the unseen, a sun that hath its own heavens and its own moons, which partake of its light, and which rise from and set upon the ocean of the unseen. Nor can I ever hope to impart even a dewdrop of that which hath been decreed therein, as none is acquainted with its mysteries save God, its creator and fashioner, and his manifestations. So there may be valleys beyond that there's almost no point describing, because it's not in our potentiality to achieve them. And why should we imagine that, you know, we creatures on this planet, you know, coming into being through this confluence of elements, through all of the accidental to's and fro's of evolution over 5 billion years, should contain within ourselves the ability to reach the highest degrees of understanding. Why should we think that's something that we should necessarily have, despite, as we're assured, having a spark of the divine within us? That doesn't give us sort of the ticket to getting all the way to the end. And Baha'u'llah, I think, stops us from this imagination that we can reach all the way to that station, the station of divinity itself. But what station do we attain to? And this is where it gets very difficult to talk about, as we've already seen. Baha'u'llah says just the last three valleys are beyond the power of speech, beyond the ability of any sort of intellectual discourse. One can gesture in that direction, but that's all that one can do. An example of this, and I think one way of thinking about this, is that in these later stages, the grammar of language itself becomes the impediment. And since that is the only way we can think about things is through the rules of grammar that are accidental, by the way, that are just a feature of historical time and place and happenstance of the cultures we happen to be born into. The words we use are such an invisible wall that surrounds us and that keeps us from escaping, and we don't realize that it is. It's a completely invisible wall. I think the philosopher Wittgenstein talked about the human condition as we're like a fly trapped in a bottle. And the object of philosophy is for the fly to escape the bottle. And the walls of the bottle are the walls of our language, because the limits of our language are the limits of our world. I think Baha'u'llah is in a way nodding to this reality in various ways, when he talks about the later stages of the mystic journey having something to do with the dissolution of names and attributes themselves, the dissolution of language, the dissolution of the notion of stages. That itself becomes an impediment. In a fairly surprising place, because it comes earlier in the Seven Valleys, this is paragraph 30 of the Seven Valleys, where Baha'u'llah, he's still in the Valley of Knowledge or something like that. He's talking about, and I've referred to this paragraph several times because I think it's really one of the keys to interpreting the Seven Valleys, because he's sort of putting together several values together in a way that lets you see what's the difference between these. He says, such is the state of the wayfarers in this valley. He's speaking here of the Valley of Love. But the people of the valleys above this, the Valley of Knowledge, see the end and the beginning as one. Nay, they, and now he must be speaking of the next valley, because he goes one up. This would be the Valley of Unity. They see neither beginning nor end, and witness neither first nor last. This is the unity of first and last, unity of opposites. But then he goes further. He says, nay, rather, the denizens of the city of immortality. So now he's jumped from the Valley of Unity all the way to the last, from Valley 4, let's say, to Valley 8. He says, nay, rather, the denizens of the city of immortality. You can say this is the second station of unity, perhaps. Who dwell in the celestial gardens see not even neither first nor last. They fly from all that is first and repulse all that is last. For these have passed over the world of names, and swift as lightning fled beyond the worlds of attributes. Thus it is said, the perfection of belief in divine unity is to deny him any attributes. So naturally, the ability to say anything is taken away at this level. Baha'u'llah says this in different ways in different places. So let's look at a few of these different things. There's a beautiful tablet that in which he also summarizes the mystic quest in 3 stages, and one can line these up against the 7 valleys if you like, or the other stages. He says, know thou that between us and the creatures there standeth a ladder with 3 steps. The first is described as the world and its vanities. The second as the hereafter and all that is ordained therein. And the third as the kingdom of names. Whoso is enabled to traverse these stations shall attain the presence of the Lord of names and attributes in less than a moment. Take heed, O people of Baha, lest ye tarry at these stations. Pass over them as swiftly as a passing cloud. So this tablet for me is like kind of a double earthquake. It's okay to say, pass through the valley of this physical world. That's the first step. That's the easy one. We get this. But then the next stage that has to be transcended is the hereafter and all that is ordained therein. If we thought that was the ultimate goal, the hereafter and all that is ordained therein, Baha'u'llah says no. He says that in itself is an impediment in the end. Our notion of the hereafter, our idea about what's there, what awaits us, the party we're going to have, however we've imagined it. He says that's a veil, a concept that we have to transcend. But then beyond that, the second earthquake is that once you've transcended that realm of the hereafter and all that it contains, he says the next thing that you also have to transcend is the kingdom of names itself. So you have to go beyond words. You have to pass by that realm. So that's why I truly say just sitting and listening to great music for an hour is probably like a closer approach than sitting for an hour and listening to words, because we know that the words are not going to get us there. But here we are, faced with lots more words, and since since we're looking at the call of the Divine Beloved and these extra tablets, we're going to look at this. We're going to look at 2 more of these extra tablets that help to give still more color to this idea of what lies at this edge of the map. This is the 6th tablet in the Call of the Divine Beloved. Again, it doesn't have a title. We could call it the Tablet to the Lionhearted Soul if we like, because it begins with this little bit of poetry. O thou lion-hearted soul, even as a lion roar, that thy roaring may perchance to the seventh heaven soar. And it's a bit like a kind of abbreviated version of the Seven Values. It starts with some personal words addressed to the to his interlocutor. We've received your letter, we've heard what you've told us, and to continue, paragraph 4. This is a epistolary style. If you're writing a good letter in Arabic, you'll start with some sort of exordium and praise of God and Muhammad and his family, and that'll go on for a while, and then you'll say Amma ba'd, and to continue, and then the real sort of the meat of it comes after that. So after the opening of this tablet, where we get some sense of what Baha'u'llah is being asked, but not exactly what he was being asked. So I think it most helpful to start here on paragraph 5. And this tablet to the Lionhearted Soul, I think, is most useful for us in giving us a good sense of what the different impediments are at each stage of the journey. So this is kind of like a nice inverse of the 7 valleys, which is saying in a positive sense, here are the valleys that you pass through, here are the stages that you pass through. In this tablet to the Lionhearted Soul, he's saying at each of the stages, here's the thing you have to watch out for. So he begins, he says, thus do the wayfarers in the wilderness of solitude and search, so beginning of the journey, experience events and conditions which though to outward seeming be a mortal poison are inwardly a wholesome draught, and though in appearance a passing mirage are in reality pure and refreshing waters. Again, this is like the watchman who in outer appearance is all vengeance, but in reality is the thing that gets you to the next stage. Were I to attempt a full description of this station, neither could I express it nor the hearer grasp it, and whoso observeth with the eye of innate knowledge will confess openly as well as privily the selfsame truth. As to perceived differences, these can be attributed to the diverse stations that have been attained by them that tread the path of search and mystic knowledge. Thus, at one time, the wayfarer beholdeth the lover hastening in search of the beloved through the wilderness of desolation. And at another he see the beloved yearning for the lover across the wilds of longing and devotion, or wandering aimless and bewildered the wastes of love in his pursuit. Oh, for a drop to drink, the thirsty soul doth groan. Oh, for a thirsty soul, the spring in turn doth moan. From yet another vantage he perceiveth the lover and the beloved are one and the same, and that the seeker is himself the very object of his search. At this point we can identify that pretty clearly, so we can sort of see where he's going. He's described the valleys of love, the valleys of search, and now he's on to the valley of unity. But now he's going to tell us what's the impediment in the valley of unity. So at this vantage, okay, the lover and the beloved, he's gotten to the point of realizing it's one and the same thing. How can the lover from the loved one ever part? So it is at times the lovers of the celestial beauty sound the clarion of say all things are of God, while at others they raise the call of it is from thyself. So sometimes you're at one or the other pole of this. Some have related the aforementioned stages to the inner and outer journeys of the soul, which is the station of the knowledge of certitude. Now he's referring to some stages in the Sufi conception, or one of the Sufi conceptions of the different stages of knowledge. That there's the knowledge of certitude, or rather, there's the eye of certitude, the knowledge of certitude, the truth of certitude. The knowledge of certitude is you've heard about this thing, you've read it in a book. The eye of certitude is I've seen it. Like fire is a great example. I've read about fire. I know all about chemical reactions. I know what the thing is. That's different from seeing fire. I mean, you really don't know fire if you've read about it in a book, but have not seen fire with your own eyes. And even if
in it.
well, that's the third one, right? And even if you've seen fire with your own eyes and understand that it's this kind of chemical reaction, until you've been burned by the fire, you still don't know fire. So that's the third station. So this is another, Baha'u'llah is referring to this in this paragraph. He himself, it comes up in a few places. It comes up in the Kitab-i-Gan as well. These 3 degrees of certitude. While others that have quaffed the wine of reunion regard each and every stage as relating to that knowledge, and consider the 2 stations of the eye of certitude and the truth of certitude as being exalted above and sanctified beyond these realms in all that pertaineth unto them, even as hath been clearly affirmed by that mystic knower. For in all these stages, and this is, I think, the important point about this Valley of Unity, the mirror of the wayfarer's heart may bear the reflection of shadowy desires, wayward thoughts, and worldly attachments. Wherefore hath it been said that in these stations, at one time the hosts of reason are triumphant, and at another the armies of love prevail. At one time the clouds of affliction and sorrow conceal the heavens of gladness and joy. At another the eternal leviathan of love devoureth in one fleeting moment all manifestations of sadness, anguish, grief, and dejection, and the morn of divine guidance dawneth forth with the joyful tidings of despair not of God's mercy. And the gentle breezes of his providence dispel every vestige of torpor and estrangement. These tidings, however, are not constant and immutable in these stations, and the wayfarer remaineth confined between the right hand of faith and assurance and the left hand of denial and despair. I put a red box around this because I think this is really important. Baha'u'llah is saying there are certain limitations of these early valleys. Limitations having, maybe reason prevails, maybe love prevails, something's, getting in the way of the sort of perfect experience of the one. And one of the things that gets in the way is our attachment to false dichotomies. And here's an interesting false dichotomy. The right hand of faith and assurance and the left hand of denial and despair. Okay, it's okay thinking of denial and despair as something which is a veil, but here Baha'u'llah is putting faith and assurance itself as a kind of veil. I mean, the two things, it's just like the ladder with the 3 steps, and you have to ascend beyond something that you thought was a really good thing, like the hereafter and all that is contained. One has to ascend beyond that. Both opposites have to be transcended, both the good and the bad. And the same thing with faith and assurance and denial and despair. He says both of these, if one is attached to either one, then one that's an impediment to attaining to these next levels. Because the next levels are beyond faith and assurance and denial and despair. It's beyond, does God exist or doesn't God exist? It's beyond things that beforehand we thought were absolutely essential. They were key to our whole spiritual conception of the world. And we get to a point where suddenly the opposite may be true. Remember what Niels Bohr had said about, the deepest truths, the shallow truths are the ones whose opposites are false, but the deepest truths, and this is true of the universe, the physical universe, as well as it is of the spiritual universe. In the deepest truths, the opposites have the same station. The opposites are equally true. Now he dives in a little bit deeper, because now he's going to refer to what are the impediments at the later stages of the mystic journey. So very useful stuff. Some wayfarers remain forever veiled in these stages. That's why I put the whole thing in yellow. Others are assisted by invisible aid from the source of unfailing grace, whereat the hosts of the realm on high raise the tabernacle of divine power, and the ascendancy of, and verily our host shall conquer, is manifested, obliterating the signs and standards of every worldly attachment and limitation, even as alluded to by some who have attained to this station. At such times, the ascendancy of God's names and attributes will so surround a soul as to leave it no place either to stay or to flee. This station, however, hath its own obscurities and impediments. For they that journey towards the land of divine unity and detachment are still wrapped within the confines of names and attributes, and take delight in their gardens and bowers. So I think this is a direct reference to that third, to try to piece together the different pieces of the maps here. This is a reference to the third step on the ladder. That being wrapped within the confines of names and attributes is an impediment at later stages in the journey. Even in the stage of fana, because you have to get beyond that, as Baha'u'llah says, to get to the to completely release yourselves from names and attributes. Thus it is that in describing these stations, some have made reference to the unity of existence as a Sufi conception, Vahdad wujud, Vahdad shuhud, and the unity of appearance. So you can still be wrapped within the confines of names and attributes and take delight in their gardens of bowers. Thus it is that in describing these stations, some have made reference to the unity of existence and the unity of appearance. By this is meant that the seeker will close his eyes to all save his beloved and open them to naught but his beauty. He will pass beyond the mortal world and approach the everlasting realm. He will see no beauty but the beloved's and hear no utterance but his praise. That is, he will avert his gaze from aught save his beauty and refuse to hearken to any melody but the sweet accents of his voice. Howbeit, some are led astray, even in this station. What station are we talking about now? I think he's still talking about the valley of unity, because he's talking about those who journey towards the land of divine unity. I could be wrong, but that's my best guess. Some are led astray even in this station, for no sooner do they inhale the fragrance of reunion and hearken to the voice of the doves of heavenly grace, than they imagine themselves to have attained perfection and wander lost in the wilderness of self-conceit, thus depriving themselves of the soft-flowing stream of divine providence and the ethereal cup of heavenly delight. I think this is what Gems of Divine Mysteries is warning about at the very end, about those, and then you're sent back to the beginning without realizing it. If any trace of pride and vainglory comes into you, having made it this far into the journey. So then we get to the furthest part. Yet others, assisted by the grace of the everlasting friend, consume these veils with the fire of his love and step into the meads of ancient glory. That is, forsaking the wilderness of the unity of existence, what we thought of was a really high station, the wilderness of the unity of existence, they attain to the ultimate abode of the true appearance of the divine unity. So clearly will they witness in this stage God's all-encompassing mercy, that in every created thing, both in the world and in the souls of men, they will behold him who hath been interpreted as the holy outpouring. And this is a phrase that's found in the Kitab-i-Igan, and which is a reference to the prophet, the station of the manifestation of God, the Faiz-e Muqaddas. No longer will they close their eyes to any beauty, nor stop their ears from hearkening to any voice, for there is no prohibition in this stage, and no debarment, inasmuch as in all things they will discern with both their outer and inner eyes the revelation of the signs of him who is the King of names and attributes. And in every atom they will find a door that leadeth to the garden of divine unity, into the city of pure abstraction. Wherever I turn my gaze, 'tis thee whom I behold. So entirely will the hearts of the wayfarers be transported by longing for the ecstasies of this station, that they will come to conceive no stage apart from this stage, to these see themselves as abiding within the court of the beloved and circling round his sanctuary, and to consider it as the ultimate abode of them that search, and the uttermost station of such as have attained. I interpret this paragraph as referring to that realm beyond names and attributes. It's kind of touching upon the sort of the furthermost point. And similar to this, like having to let go of the thises and the that's. In the four valleys, this is the number 7 in Call of the Divine Beloved. In paragraph 36, Baha'u'llah says, on this plane the highest heavens are neither opposed to nor distinguished from the lowly earth, for this is the realm of divine favors, not the arena of worldly contraries. So we're seeing something about these later stages, and the reasoning here is getting more fuzzy because the concepts are getting less accessible to piecing together in a rational way. we're getting a sense that there is this complementary stage to annihilation, which is called immortality, which can be accessed through the traversing through the sequence of stages, or, as Baha'u'llah says, could be traversed actually in one step. It's possible to skip all of this business and head straight to that point, to this to immortality. And here's how Baha'u'llah describes it. And this is from the first of the new tablets, called the tablet from the letter B to the letter E, from the Ba to the Ha, letter Ba to the letter Ha. And this is on pages 58 and 59 of Call of the Divine Beloved. He says, to continue, it is clear that the wayfarers in the wilderness of search and longing, of attainment and reunion, have numerous degrees and countless stations. Some, after spiritual struggle and physical toil, ascend from the lower reaches of no God is there, that's the La, to the lofty bowers of but God, that's the Illah. Flee from the shadows of negation to abide in the limitless realms of affirmation, and abandon the privation of a transient existence for the bountiful assemblage of reunion. This is the uttermost limit of the realm of effort and striving. So this is going through all the stages, doing the work to transcend the no and get to the yes. Walk up the ladder, go through the 3 steps. But there's another way, Baha'u'llah says. Others, without receiving the least intimation of the La, of the no God is there, pass beyond the highest horizon of the Illah, of the but God, without even tasting a dewdrop of the degrees of Fana, self-surrender, ascend unto the kingdom of Baqa, life everlasting. And without partaking of the wellspring of utter abnegation, again Fana, quaff the wine of the Ancient of Days. These souls, as they traverse the stages of wayfaring and ascend unto the stations of reunion, walk a different path and occupy a different rank. Who are these souls that don't have to go through all of this business of figuring things out and going through all the pain and suffering? They get a sort of, they got the cheat code, and now they punched in the cheat code and they're on level whatever, level 100.
But do we know of anyone in the history?
He didn't name them, so we don't know if they exist or who they were or whatever. But I mean, he does promise us. He says this, where he talks about this ocean of the revelation which is surging within all things. He says it's astonishingly near unto you. Behold, it is closer to you than your life's fame.
Yeah.
Swift as the twinkling of an eye, you can, if you but wish it. So there's that idea of, it's an instantaneous possibility, but how many people actually, do it and actually get there swift as the twinkling of an eye? But he's not done, because there's another category. He says, still others, paragraph 4, without having perused a single letter of the kingdom of names, or acquired the faintest intimation from the realm of attributes, which pertain to this world, dawn above the invisible horizon of eternity and return again thereunto. 100,000 seas of glory surge in their luminous hearts, and yet to outward seeming, their lips are parched. A myriad rivers of holiness stream within their breasts, and yet no trace thereof is to be seen. The books of God's consummate wisdom are recorded upon the tablets of their hearts, and yet they breathe not a word thereof in the world of appearances. They dwell in the Egypt of certitude and journey in the lands of resignation. They are intoxicated with the beauty and entranced by the glory of him who is the all-glorious. Heart to heart they whisper hidden secrets. Soul to soul they unfold abstruse matters. The mysteries of the divine essence glow upon their brows, and the lights of divine unity shine from their peerless faces. They clothe themselves in the robe of concealment and cast their sleeves over both this world and the world to come. Without wings, they soar. Without feet, they walk. Without hands, they grasp and hold. They speak an unknown tongue and observe an unseen grammar, of which all the world's inhabitants know not a single letter, save those whom thy Lord hath willed. So this lucky group gets to skip Benoan Baga and go straight to the beyond the names and attributes. So what are we to do with all of this? We have a notion of what's on the other. Here's the question: what's on the other side of this annihilation that we have thought of as like the uttermost we can do is to just get rid of ourself, slough off this outer sheath of self, or if we like, through a different analogy, remove that pith of self from the inside of the reed so that the music can pass through that hollow reed. You know, either metaphor works. But what's on the other side of that? Do we get it all back on the other side? You know, like the hero's journey, the monomyth that Joseph Campbell made famous in the 60s, it's incorporated into just about every, Hollywood movie these days has some version of the hero's journey. You know, the hero starts off in the village, and they go through a journey of various tests and trials into the metaphorical underworld. You know, in the underworld they meet a guide. They're transformed. They're purified. They're burned up in a way, and then they return. And it's a cyclical kind of a thing. The hero returns back to the village at the end, having been through the journey into the unknown. The question is, who returns? You know, is it the same person that it was before? Is it the same person who says, "Man, that was an interesting journey. You know, I had some great experiences. I'm back. I'll get back to work now and do the stuff I was doing before." Or is it like an actual different person who returns? Because they've been so fundamentally transformed that it's no longer, they may appear the same on the outside. They may have the same DNA if you want to run a 23andMe test or something, but it's a different person in reality. And which is it? And maybe it can be either one. Maybe this is one of those, you can't say, well, this is a factually correct that it's this way and not this way. But there's something hidden, I think, and mysterious about the nature of this transformation. And I think that partly has something to do with safety and danger. Because it's dangerous to imagine that on the other end of that mystic path, you're no longer the same. Because in the end, we're really attached to ourselves. We really want this self to last. With all our memories intact, with our personalities, who we knew, what we've done, where we went on vacation, whatever. We want to take all that with us. And you can read some of these passages about mystic journey in ways as that's not how it works. But you can also read these same passages as, well, if you want, then that's how it works. If that's what you need, then that's how it works. There was that person who talked to Abdul Baha and said, what about my dog? Does my dog get eternal life too? Will I meet my dog in heaven? And Abdul Baha very wisely says to this person,
If you need.
right? If you need to, they'll be there. He doesn't say no, dogs don't have eternal life because they don't have eternal souls. He said, if you need to, it'll be there. I suspect maybe that's how it is with ourselves. If you need to, it'll be there. If you want to have all those memories, if you really want those memories with you, the good and all the embarrassing, I don't know if I want all of those memories. I don't want to take all of these limitations with me. There was a really great TV series called The Good Place. Did anyone see The Good Place? Ted Danson, Kristen Bell. Yes. And it went through several seasons. Really profound ideas. At the end of the first season, I can't spoil. That's a huge spoiler at the end of the first season, so I'm not going to tell you the spoiler at the end of the first season. But the basic idea is, at the end, the good place is heaven, and they figure out what heaven really is, and it goes on and on and on, kind of almost to eternity. And at the sort of the end of the last episode of the last season, the protagonist says, "Okay, I've had enough. I'm ready to go now." And this is heaven, right? Like, I'm ready to go now. They said, okay, all you have to do is walk through that archway. And they walked through the archway. And they disappeared. And that was it. It's like, well, what happened to them? That's that's kind of the mystery. Imagine taking yourself with all its limitations and try to project that into infinity. Is there really literally infinite number of things you can do, experiences you can have, places you can go that won't get old when you actually have an infinite amount of time available? It's going to become, whatever you think is heaven, project that onto infinity and it becomes hell. Because we, as we are constructed in our boundaried selves, intrinsically limited selves, can't experience infinity without that becoming hell at some point. So that's why I think some mystics would say, well, yeah, if you need that self, if that's the only thing that's going to motivate you to get through this life, then you get that. That's what you. But if you want this other way of thinking about it, if you want to let go of the self entirely, if you want to be the drop that merges with the sea, then here's another path that you can take. So we have, yes.
Just a quick question. Does it say in the writings that God helps us, right? If we pray, we get the help we need, and we progress. But He doesn't allow us to go beyond a certain place because we're not ready. So He gives us in incremental. Where is that? Because that's kind of how life has been for me. Just
Yes.
I get afraid when I get to the threshold, and I fear it because I don't know it.
Yes.
And so I don't think I'm given what I need to go through that threshold. But then later on, I'm ready, maybe. I don't know. What's your...
How many things a man knoweth cannot be spoken? How does it go? How many things he can speak are not timely? And how many timely utterances are considered as unsuited to the capacity of the hearer?
That's perfect. Right. Everything a man knoweth. Yeah.
So we're continuing into the vortex. I apologize if any of this is making you uncomfortable. But Baha'u'llah tells us that there are two great mysteries which we're never going to understand. And he talks about them in two separate sections of gleanings. So maybe these are two unconnected mysteries. There happen to be two unconnected great mysteries. My suspicion is that these two unconnected great mysteries are actually two facets of one mystery. The first mystery is out of the soul. Baha'u'llah says in Gleanings 82, he says, "Thou hast asked me concerning the nature of the soul. Know verily that the soul is a sign of God, a heavenly gem, whose reality the most learned of men hath failed to grasp, and whose mystery no mind, however acute, can ever hope to unravel." And in Gleanings 83, kind of connects it to something else. It says, "Having recognized thy powerlessness to attain to an adequate understanding of that reality which abideth within thee," our own souls, "thou wilt readily admit the futility of such efforts to fathom the mystery of the living God. This confession of the helplessness, which mature contemplation must eventually impel every mind to make, is itself the acme of human understanding, and marketh the culmination of man's development." So we're powerless in terms of understanding our own souls, how much more powerless we are in understanding the reality of God. Both of these great mysteries. He said, and once you really let go of the thought that you might understand them, you've reached a certain level of development. So let's see why each of these are mysteries or a way in which these are mysteries in the Baha'i writings, and why I think these mysteries are connected. And this is going to get us into really interesting territory. I don't know if we'll have time this session, or we'll have to finish next session. We'll see how much time we have left. So first of all, where are we going to locate God? Why is God such a mystery? I mean, there's a being that created the world, whose existence can be proven. The logical proofs are there. Just read some answered questions. Abdu'l-Baha gives all these logical proofs for God's existence. But then he says, I've given these proofs for the weak-minded. But if you open the inner eye, you see the reality of things as clearly as the day. But the logical proofs are crutches, and they're openly acknowledged by Abdu'l-Baha as such. These are intellectual crutches. For those who need them, we probably shouldn't call them crutches, but that's, he comes as close as you can to saying that in some answer questions. So what then is this reality? What's the nature of this reality? Is it out there? Is it in here? How do we think about it? I've already quoted these hidden words about that divine essence which is within. Thou art my lamp and my light is in thee. Somehow that God that we seek is within, but most of the writings talk about God being out there. Every prayer we read, with maybe one exception that I can think of, is addressing God as a being out there, a being to whom we address our needs, our wants for forgiveness, for grace, mercy. It's a relationship of the servant to the king. It's a relationship of the lover to the beloved. The language of our prayers is the language of duality. It's the language of the servant being other than God. There's that beautiful prayer that we already heard earlier today, revealed in thyself, mystery of prayer, holy ecstasy of prayer may fill our souls, prayer that shall rise above words and letters, transcend the murmur of syllables and sounds, that all things may be merged into nothingness before the revelation of thy grandeur. So there's a touch of that non-dual, of that idea of the God beyond being in there. But most of the prayers are not that way. There's a beautiful poem by Rumi, I think, that captures this duality so well. And this is one of my all-time favorite quotations from anything, because it involves Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, the Bab, and for good measure it throws in Christ and Rumi. They're all part of this quotation, because this is quoted in Memorials of the Faithful, which is by Abdu'l-Baha. And Abdu'l-Baha relates that at one point, this fellow by the name of Ustad Ismail, Baha'u'llah had written down an ode of Rumi for Ustad Ismail and had told him to turn his face towards the Bab and sing the words set to a melody. And so as Ustad Ismail wandered through the long dark nights on his way, I cut this part out, on his way to Akka to visit Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah told him, chant these verses of Rumi as you're addressing yourself to the Bab. And Abdu'l-Baha tells us about this. So everyone has a part of this. You may have heard this one before. It's pretty well known. I am lost, O love, possessed and dazed. Love's fool am I in all the earth. They call me first among the crazed, though I once came first for wit and worth. O love, who sellest me this wine. O love, for whom I burn and bleed. Love, for whom I cry and pine. Thou the piper, I the reed. If thou wishest me to live, through me blow thy holy breath. The touch of Jesus thou wilt give to me who've lain in age and death. Thou both end and origin, thou without and thou within. From every eye thou hidest well, and yet in every eye dost dwell. So we have God being the first and the last, the inner and the outer of things, and the hidden and the manifest. All of these opposites are all equally applicable to that thing which is the final goal of the mystic quest. It's outside us, at the same time it's inside us. We are the thing that we are seeking. As in the Seven Valleys, the sea morgue was the final object of the quest of the 30 birds of the sea morgue who end up discovering the sea morgue. It's a journey of self-discovery. And that journey of self-discovery involves a profound realization about the nature of the soul, which is connected to the nature of prayer, that the Bab very neatly explodes for us in one of his tablets. And we have Nader Saidi to thank for bringing some of these absolute gems from the Bab's writings into his work, Gate of the Heart, which is the only place you can go to find some of these truly stunning ideas. So the Bab writes, he who worshipeth God through any one but him, by gazing at his own self as the worshipper, and at God as the object of his worship, hath joined partners with God, and hath never worshipped him. So this kind of like inverts all of the prayers that we have. Thousands of prayers in the Baha'i writings are all addressing God as the object of worship, and we're the worshiper. And the Bab is here saying this is a form of idolatry at some level. At some level, obviously it's not, otherwise we wouldn't have all these prayers. Otherwise we wouldn't have the obligatory prayers, which are also written in the language of the worshiper addressing the object of worship. So there's a wisdom behind it, clearly. But the Bab also wants us to understand that at some level, it's a form of idolatry to treat God as something outside ourselves. There's only one thing, because otherwise, why is it a form of idolatry? Because otherwise you're setting up two separate things. You're saying two different things, at least two things, have independent existence. Whereas only one thing can have independent existence, and that's the reality of God. And the implication of that is that, well, we who think we have this independent existence, that's not what it is. It's a dependent existence, which is actually a part of God's own yearning for his own essence. It's a part of that fourth pathway of love that Abdu'l-Baha talks about in one of the later chapters of Paris Talks. So we might be familiar with this, where Abdu'l-Baha says there are four pathways of love. There's the love of God for the creature. There's the love of the creature for God. There's the love of the creature for the creature. And then he says there's the love of God for his own essence. That's the logical completion of it. And Baha'u'llah says through that divine love, he says this primordial love, he says all other love comes into existence through one ray of that love of God for his own essence. Which is kind of, it's a logical contradiction to talk about, but that's the metaphor that you need to get to this point of what's the bare metal layer, what's the base layer of reality. It is the divine essence contemplating and loving its own essence, and we're part of that. That's what sacralizes, elevates, and divinizes the human reality. That's what makes that interior aspect of our soul something which is that divine spark, because it's part of that self loving movement of the divine. And then prayer then becomes something very different from what we thought it was. It's no longer asking God for stuff, spiritual stuff, physical stuff, whatever. But it's no longer asking God for stuff. It's communing with your own inner reality, which is a different sort of way of approaching what the nature of prayer is. It's not conversation with God. It is conversation with God at one point. Otherwise, Abdu'l-Baha wouldn't have said it. But in our introductory materials where we talk about prayer, we say, well, what is prayer? Prayer is conversation with God. And that's kind of where it stops. But the Baha'i writings are vastly, vastly more profound about the nature of prayer. One way of thinking, one pathway to thinking about prayer is it's a form of conversation with God. But another pathway of thinking about it is it starts with this quotation from the Bab. So this idea about well, does God have any positive attributes that we can even think about? Can we put God in the category of a being out there whose existence is or is not open to question, is something which has a long history in various religions, notably in Sufism, but also in early Christianity. And this is a famous figure by the name of Pseudo Dionysius, who is not the same Dionysius of the ancient Greeks, but someone whose name has been lost to history, but has left behind this mind-bending book called The Divine Names and the Mystical Theology. And I say I left out the page number, but it's in there somewhere. If you Google it, you'll find it. Already people were, before Islam, thinking about the Christian God, which the Christian God, the Jewish God, the God that we find in the pages of the Old and New Testament, is very much a concretized, anthropomorphized God that's wrathful, that walks with Adam in the Garden of Eden in the early days. It's a very personalized God. But already some of the Christian theologians of the 5th and 6th century AD had the suspicion that it was other than what everyone else thought. And he says in this book, God-like minds can find no more fitting method to celebrate its praises than to deny it every manner of attribute. Even the title of goodness we do not ascribe to it, because we think such a name suitable, but desiring to frame some conception and language about this, its ineffable nature, we consecrate as primarily belonging to it the names we most revere. That's why God is all powerful and merciful in all of this. It's because we have no other recourse. And in this too we shall be in agreement with the sacred writers. Nevertheless, the actual truth must still be far beyond this. Hence, we have given our preference to the negative method, because this lifts the soul above all things cognate with its finite nature. So we find this negative method, which is also known as negative theology or apophatic theology, in these later stages of the mystic journey in Baha'u'llah's writings. You know, the dark night that one can, that in the tradition of Kamel that we cited in the last session, this blackest of nights where one doesn't find one's way. That's the cloud. The Amma, in the Rashi Amma, Baha'u'llah's first work of revelation that we have record of, or the first significant one, Baha'u'llah refers to this sprinkling from this cloud of unknowing. The cloud of Amma is this cloud of the God which is completely invisible, the God of negative theology. And so we have in our conception of God an idea of, well, God exists, but God doesn't exist, and they're both sort of correct at the same time, but you can really only see it from one frame of reference at any given moment, kind of like particles and waves. Similarly, the non-duality of the soul and its relationship to God. In the Four Valleys, Baha'u'llah gives us a beautiful quotation. I'm pretty sure this is from Rumi. It says, "This is the realm of pure awareness and utter self-effacement. Not even love can find a way to this plane, nor doth affection have a place therein. Wherefore it is said, love is a veil betwixt the lover and the beloved." He quotes this more than once. "Here love becometh but an obstructing veil, and aught save the friend but a curtain. Thus the wise Sana'i hath written," sorry, Sana'i, not Rumi, "None may approach that well-beloved who harboreth his own desire. None may embrace that beauteous form who's burdened with his own attire." What's this saying? You can't achieve oneness, and it's saying it in very erotic terms. It's saying you can't achieve union with the beloved if you're wearing your clothes. You have to take off your clothes to make that physical union, to consummate that physical union. And in a divine sense, that's also correct. The physical clothes that you can't wear are the clothing of our nafs, of our self, of that self that has to be burned away in the fire of love and through all of these stages. And once you divest yourself of that outer clothing, only then can you merge with the beloved and become one with the beloved. This is a case where the original translation really didn't do justice to this idea. It was never. Does everybody have the old translation? It says, "Never the shrouded soul unite with beauty's rose," versus "None may embrace that beauteous form who's burdened with his own attire." It captures much better the idea of having to kind of tear it all off and get down to the essence. And in this vein, Abdu'l-Baha tells us, "Release yourselves from this world's life, and at every stage long ye for non-existence. For when the ray returneth to the sun, it is wiped out." And here the word in Persian is fana. "And when the drop cometh to the sea, it vanisheth. And when the true lover findeth his beloved, he yieldeth up his soul." In another sense, we are waves of the sea, drops of the ocean. Similar kind of way of thinking about the ephemerality of the human reality. Your souls are as waves on the sea of the spirit. Although each individual is a distinct wave, the ocean is one, and all are united in God. Every heart should radiate unity, so that the light of the one divine source of all may shine forth bright and luminous. We must not consider the separate waves alone, but the entire sea. We should rise from the individual to the whole, The spirit is as one great ocean, and the waves thereof are the souls of men. He doesn't spell out that waves are ephemeral. They appear and disappear on the surface of the ocean. He wisely perhaps doesn't mention that implication of the metaphor. So I think between these two great mysteries, this mystery of a God that exists, doesn't exist, it's somehow inside, outside, first, last, and a soul which is somehow separate from but united with God, we have a few more passages that can sort of add and flesh this idea out a bit more. One is from Gleanings, number 153. Baha'u'llah says, "Could ye apprehend with what wonders of my munificence and bounty I've willed to entrust your souls, ye would of a truth rid yourselves of attachment to all created things, and would gain a true knowledge of your own selves, a knowledge which is the same as the comprehension of mine own being. You would find yourselves independent of all else but me, and would perceive with your inner and outer eye, and as manifest as the revelation of my effulgent name, the seas of my loving kindness and bounty moving within you." There's a famous hadith which is quoted in the Baha'i writings that he who hath known himself hath known his Lord. How does it go? Arafa nafsuhu faqad arafa rabbahu. He who hath known himself hath known his Lord. In Gleanings number 1, I wonder if Shoghi Effendi put this in the first section of Gleanings for a reason. Because it's a longer passage, but hidden in this Gleanings first section is this very, very lovely gem. "Whatever duty thou hast prescribed unto thy servants, of extolling to the utmost thy majesty and glory of God, is but a token of thy grace unto them, that they may be enabled to ascend unto the station conferred upon their own inmost being, the station of the knowledge of their own selves." So all this business of glorifying God out there, well, this is the whole point of that, is coming into closer relationship with the reality in here. It's such a counterintuitive movement, but that's the nature of it. Baha'u'llah in Prayers and Meditations says something similar. So you're finding, it's interesting how most of the prayers are in this very clearly distinct dualistic mode of God out there and the soul down here. But if you look hard enough, you can find these intimations of this much more non-dualistic mode of thinking about it. "Every time I'm reminded of thee and muse on thy virtues," Baha'u'llah says, "I am seized with such ecstasies, and am so enravished by thee, that I find myself unable to make mention of thy name and to extol thee. I am carried back to such heights that I recognize myself to be the same as the remembrance of thee in thy realm, and the essence of thy praise among thy servants. As long as that self endureth, so long will thy praise continue to be shed abroad among thy creatures, and thy remembrance glorified by thy people. Every man endued with insight among thy servants is persuaded that myself liveth eternally and can never perish, inasmuch as remembrance of thee is eternal, and will endure so long as thine own self endureth. And thy praise is everlasting and will last so long as thine own sovereignty will last." It's easy to read past this and not kind of think about what's Baha'u'llah really saying here. He's saying, myself is the same as the remembrance of thee in thy realm. He's making an interesting identification of the self, which we think is this like separate atomic reality that's something other than everyone else, and something other than God. And Baha'u'llah's drawing an identity here, almost in passing. He's saying the self is the same as the remembrance of thee in thy realm, which is kind of God's remembrance of himself. Now, I wouldn't have caught this if the Bab hadn't said this much more clearly. And this also we have Nader Saidi to thank for finding this gem. And this, I think of all the quotations I have in this presentation, this is probably the one that's for me is the biggest earthquake. He says, "Therefore it is necessary, according to true wisdom, that the pre-existent God describe himself to his creatures, that they may recognize their creator, and that out of the grace of the pre-existent, the contingent beings may attain their supreme end. This divine self-description is itself a created thing. As we'll find out, it's the universe. The divine self-description is the universe, including us. Whoso hath recognized it, hath recognized his Lord. This description, this divine self-description, is denoted as the soul or self. And he who hath known himself hath known his Lord. Behold with the eye of thy heart. Verily, thy truth, the truth of thy being, is the divinity of thy Lord revealed unto thee and through thee. Thou art he himself, and he is thou thyself, except that indeed thou art that thou art, and he is that he is. So much to unpack for this. Like every phrase here, there's a lot to unpack. But now, reading this now, we can go backwards to that passage from Prayers and Meditations. He says, the divine self-description. Like, why is the divine self-description a thing? Why does God have to describe or remember himself to himself? This is the term here is zeksh. Somehow the universe comes into being in this theological conception as the primal will. The Bob says this over and over. The primal will is a self-generated thing, and the primal will, which we can call God as far as we're concerned, although it's not the same. The primal will brings creation into being through its own self-remembrance. Basically, what he's saying is we are. What I think it's saying is that we are drops of that ocean of the primal will. It's another way of saying what we were just reading a few passages back. Or we're rays of that sun. The notion of God being the sun and creation as his rays is nice as far as it goes, but the problem is the metaphor breaks down because the rays bend back and return to the sun. There's an emanation of things, but the scheme of emanation includes everything returning back to the one. And so in our minds, we think of the rays of the sun and they just go out into outer space forever. And so it's a little unfortunate that the metaphor breaks down. But similarly with the soul is this mode of the divine self-description. So going back to Baha'u'llah then in Prayers and Meditations, we maybe read it differently when he says, I am carried back to such heights that I recognize myself to be the same as the remembrance of thee in thy realm, and the essence of thy praise amongst thy servants. Feel free to argue against this, that maybe I'm reading too much into this.
Well, I'm just wondering if he's speaking as the manifestation, and that's a different level, a different station that we can't attain. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I've always interpreted that passage that you just had before as him as mm-hmm. In the station of the manifestation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you?
In which, yes.
Did you say Zek?
Yes. Remembrance. Yes. Or mention. Yeah. And that's that self-remembrance. The Zekr is also another word for the primal will in the writings of the Baha'u'llah. Yeah, so if in this section of Prayers and Meditations he's only referring to his own self, then we're excluded from that meditation. But then why would why would we have all these prayers and meditations that we're not included in it? So we know something about what the prophet is thinking about their own station. Then how do we know which ones apply to us and which ones apply to the prophet? And then what do we do with this passage of the Bab that says most explicitly that the solar self is this mode of the divine self-remembrance?
And that's where Kamal asked him how he could see God or get to know God. And Kamal asked him that.
In the tradition of Kamal from before.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he says it's the blackest of nights. And yeah, Kevin, do you know the tradition of Kamal? It's one of these, I can't recite it from heart, otherwise I would, but it's a series of questions and answers, each answer of which is goes more off the deep end than the answer before. Part of it was cited and quoted in last session.
Doesn't he respond with that then at the end? this in the Gate of the Heart? Isn't that his final response to it?
Is it?
To Kamal?
I don't remember. I don't remember. Yes.
It's
Mike.
Camille asks Ali, Imam Ali, for about the truth. Right?
Yeah. Yes. It's a tradition of
and
truth.
he says, "What does thou have to do with the truth?"
Yeah.
And then there's this process that Camille goes through to a kind of humility that he attains, and he says something like, "Wouldn't a great one like thee reign providence over wisdom?" You know, he has to go through this, and the point of it is that Camille had to go through and come to this state that you just named, that because Imam Ali is criticizing him for separating himself from the truth, from God. So he has to come to that point where he becomes humble enough to get to this quote right here.
Yeah.
That's a very bad paraphrase of the whole thing, but that's what happens in that incident.
Yeah.
Right? The other thing I just wanted to say is that we say myself, but I think the point of all this is we didn't create ourselves. So when we have to be in the possessive to empower ourselves to do things, but the real point is we are not in possession of ourselves to begin with. We didn't create ourselves, so it's getting back to that consciousness of not possessing the very thing that we've been given.
Right. And from one perspective, that's absolutely the case. We didn't physically bring ourselves into being. Our parents did. And from another perspective, seeing ourselves as Baha'u'llah says, with the divine light placed within us, participating in that divine dance of creation, you know, we are part of the creative process. And of course, we can't then take that too far to the point of pride and vainglory. And Baha'u'llah says this is one of the impediments of the journey. He says, and one of the impediments at the later stages of the journey, he says, the impediment here is that you can fall prey to pride and vainglory, to self-conceit, because now you've come to this very exalted conception of the self, which is, oh, the self is identical to the divine. Oh, I'm just part of God's own song to himself. But you're supposed to remember at the same time that you're lowlier than the dust and that you came from nothing, you're returning to nothing and all of that. And you somehow have to square that circle. And that's part of the danger. So let's get to the danger section, because this is dangerous stuff, right? These are dangerous ideas.
On the present meditations quotation, on the yellow part,
Yes.
it says that I recognize myself to be the same as the remembrance of thee, not the same as thee, but same as
Yes. The remembrance of thee.
remembrance of thee,
Yes.
which to me is a little bit different than what you've been saying in proposing.
It's not the same as God. I'm not talking about God here. I'm talking about the primal will. And maybe one way to make that clear, there is a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha called the Tablet of the Universe, where he talks about the celestial spheres. He talks about the whole universe as this enormous confluence of stars and planets and so forth. And he quotes a hadith that says, God created all the stars and planets and all the creatures and everything, and he suspended them all within a single lamp. Like those mosque, if you've gone into a mosque and you see those beautiful mosque lamps hanging from the ceiling. So the universe and everything that is contained within it is suspended in a single lamp. And God only knoweth what is in the other lamps. So I imaginatively go in two directions with this. One is, wow, the multiverse may be a thing. You know, it's a really sexy idea now in cosmology to talk about multiverses. It gets rid of all sorts of inconvenient problems about fine-tuning and so forth. You say, oh, well, there's just an infinite number of universes. So maybe that's the way it is. Maybe it's not. But this might suggest that there may be sort of parallel creations out there. And the other direction to go is that, well, each individual lamp then is its own kind of self-sufficient creation. Each individual lamp is an individual instance of the primal will of the divine self-remembrance, remembering itself to itself, and thus creating the world. So that's one way of squaring this circle of not identifying ourselves with God, because God is still a complete unknown in this equation. God is whatever principle is behind all of these multiple lamps, all these multiple universes. God is beyond the we as a shorthand, we talk about the primal will and sometimes make the identification of the primal will with God. And the manifestations as incarnations of that primal will in the world, sometimes we, as a shorthand, talk about the manifestations as being identical with God. There's a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha where he explains why it is that at the head of every one of the tablets he wrote, thousands and thousands of tablets that Abdu'l-Baha wrote, he wrote Hovallah. And we all hear this as the opening of all the chants of all the Persian prayers. And when you hear Hovallah, you know, oh, this is a prayer of Abdu'l-Baha, not a prayer of Baha'u'llah, because the prayers of Abdu'l-Baha begin with Hovallah. And Abdu'l-Baha wrote to because someone asked him, why do you always put Hovallah at the head of your tablets? And Abdu'l-Baha said, it's because I'm saying, when I say he is God, that's what Hovallah means, I'm saying the manifestation is God. I'm not saying God equals God in that sort of tautological, meaningless sense. What I'm saying is that Baha'u'llah is the closest we get as the most perfect expression of these divine names and attributes on the planet. And so we say then that, as shorthand really, that he is God. But at some philosophical level, you make that distinction. That distinction is important to maintain. So do we have time to go into the danger, or we're out of time? So we're going to get into the danger part tomorrow morning, I guess. But we're done for today. Enough damage has been done for today. I apologize.